I'm Tim Glover, and I'm a potential candidate for Arbory, Castletown and Malew.
Well, Tim, obviously better known for many people as being on Manx Radio, I think, for some 24 years. The first question then has to be, why are you standing to be an MHK?
I did think about it 5 years ago, but didn't feel it was the right time. And I'm a great feeler, a believer in gut instinct. And when I came to Manx Radio 24 years ago, I was offered a job. It was a big change from where I was, because I was at Barclays Private Bank at the time. And I had that feeling if I didn't take the job at Manx Radio, I might regret it. And I'm so glad I did have that feeling and took the job. I've got that same feeling now, and I don't want to live a life full of regrets.
It could be argued that you're following a well-trodden path of former journalists, an expectation perhaps that you'll get in just because people know your name?
I don't think that's the case at all, and I know who you're referring to, of course, there is Jeff Cannell and David Collister. I'm not relying on, it's not a popularity contest at all. I want to be upfront with the voters, listen to what they're saying, and put a manifesto forward that is successful, and I'd be very honoured to earn that respect and get in as a candidate, as an MHK for Arbory, Castletown and Malew. So it's not a popularity contest. It's got to be based on sound policies and sound agendas.
We'll talk about sound policies and sound agendas in just a moment, but I want to know what you believe are the specific qualities that you've gained by being a journalist here at Manx Radio, by being the news editor in recent years, which you feel make you good MHK material.
Well, I know how to listen for a start. I know how to ask questions. I know how to investigate matters, and I know how to hold people to account. So I think all of those attributes, I hope, will be able to be carried forward and used as an MHK.
Being a politician is much more than that, though, isn't it? It's one thing being able to ask questions and being seen perhaps as a backbencher who is a scrutiniser, but you have to understand in depth some of this legislation that perhaps the public don't even know goes on.
And you also have to understand that legislation as a journalist as well. I know a little bit more than, say, other candidates about the workings of Tynwald and the workings of the House of Keys. That is to my advantage, but I'm going in very open-eyed about it. The knowledge I have will not be extensive. It will not be the complete picture. I've got to go in and learn the ropes if I get elected. And I don't want to just be a voice shouting from the backbenches. I want to be involved as well.
So you want to be part of government then?
I want to be involved in a department. I don't know which one yet. It would be, I think, very arrogant to say which department. So you don't get that choice. And you don't get that opportunity unless you win the people's vote in Arbory, Castletown and Malew. And that's what I'm concentrating on, is knocking on doors, having those conversations, finding out what people like, finding out what people don't like. I have invented Manx Radio and other media organisations questionnaires, so I've come up with areas where I think my priorities are, but I want to listen and hear what the people are saying as well and be a listening voice for the constituency and for the island.
It's really interesting because I think seeking the constituents' view before putting together a manifesto has become something of a mantra for this election campaign for many candidates. Surely voters deserve to know where you stand on certain issues and not feel that you're just trying to win their votes by saying what they want to hear.
My manifesto is not going to be based on that, but I think it's very important to go out and have those conversations, to have an understanding of what the issues are out there, and to incorporate the bigger issues that come up, the ones that come up frequently when you're out knocking on the doors and talking to people. Those have to be part of a manifesto because they're issues of the constituents that in the end, if you get elected, you're representing them.
But surely as a would-be politician, doesn't there need to be something that you're going in with a passion for, an aim to resolve, rather than just trying to work out what the voter issues might be?
Absolutely, and I've nailed my colours to the mast. I think mental well-being is one that I'm particularly big on. I also know fully too well that it wasn't on the questionnaire because every candidate would have answered it. If they didn't, I would suggest that was being a little bit naive. But we have to economically recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the number one priority, is the economy, because without that, And without the money, you can't deal with a lot of other issues. And dealing with that issue, I think you don't want to leave anyone behind as well. We have to have a social conscience too.
Okay, let's just talk about the economy for a moment, because I wonder how you'll be able to come up with your own ideas about economy. It's very easy to question politicians as a journalist. It's harder to be that politician with ideas, I'd suggest.
I totally agree with you, and this is a strange experience for me being on this side of the microphone, to be perfectly frank with you. But I think we are in a better position than a lot of other places are. We had the freedom of last summer, for example, where, okay, we didn't have the hospitality sector up and running, the hotels, but most of the rest of the Manx economy was able to function to some extent. We do have vast reserves, and I know one question I keep hearing, I've listened to other candidates being interviewed, is, well, how can we afford that? We have got more reserves than we've ever had at any time in the Isle of Man's history, so we're not in that bad a position, but we have to stimulate the economy, because that drives every other part of anyone's agenda.
Okay, so how would you do that then?
Look at what the issues are first. Obviously, I think we are going to need to continue to support the hospitality and the hotel sector for the time being. They're not going to have an easy fix, but if we want to still have a tourism industry, we have got to maintain that support for that sector. Otherwise, it's lost. We've lost it then for the big events like the TT and the Manx Grand Prix and the Southern 100. Not everybody wants to stay in a tent. I don't. I'm not at the age now where I like my creature comforts rather than being on a campsite. So we've got to look at it in the whole. We've got to make the island attractive to get people to come here and work here. I think at the moment there's a lot of work still needs to be done there. So we've got to just stimulate the economy. We've got to attract jobs. We've got to look at the green sector as well for attracting jobs.
Now, you keep saying we need to stimulate the economy, but what I specifically asked you there was, okay, how? Because this is where many would-be politicians fall down. It's really easy to say, we need to do this, we need to do that, but actually getting down to the nitty-gritty and saying, this is what I propose, does sound like it's a bit more difficult for you.
Well, I think support is a big thing. We've got to support the green economy. That's, I think, where one area of future is. We've got all the Department of Enterprise schemes at the moment. How much business are they actually bringing to the island? We've got to look at the insurance sector, the gaming sector, continue to make the island attractive to them, because businesses can be very fickle. Unless everything is right in this jurisdiction, they could easily move to another jurisdiction. So it's about looking after and caring about our island.
I'm not quite sure whether you've specifically answered my question there, because if you are elected in September, I just want to know what ideas you're going to go in with to stimulate the economy. And you talk about the green economy. I wonder whether it could be argued you haven't necessarily been too bothered about the green economy and the climate change issues when you've been commentating on the TT, perhaps.
Well, I must admit that the TT0 and the loss of that, I think, was a step backwards. I'll be quite honest on that. Yes, I know why it didn't have the entry, it didn't have the popularity, if you like, but to me, the TT is about the future. And it always has been about looking at manufacturers will base bikes and build bikes, production bikes that are then available to the public from the TT, similar to Formula One with cars. TT0 and the loss of that, I think, is a mistake. I'd like to see that back, but I get the point you're making.
Is there a chance of you being swayed, perhaps, by petrol heads and TT lobbyists when it comes to sort of matching up your policies with regards to green issues?
No, I think rather like Brexit, we knew that was coming and we had to gear up for it. We know climate change and the green agenda is coming. And so far I'm hearing a lot of principles, a lot of talk about it, but I haven't heard what the practical side of that is. So, for example, what are we going to do with diesel and petrol cars? Is there going to be a scrappage scheme, for example? What are we going to do with electric car batteries when they've expired? I'm not hearing the nuts and bolts, as it were, of what the climate change agenda is and how we're going to move to the zero emissions by 2050. I think government needs to communicate what it's planning in a lot more detail.
And are those the sort of questions you'll be asking if you're elected in September?
It is. I want to find out what incentives there are going to be. Are there going to be grants available? Because unless we bring the island's population along with changes, making the island greener, they aren't necessarily, I think, going to get on board with this whole agenda. So what grants, what schemes is the government going to put forward to bring the people along with them?
OK, you have been very prominent with the COVID media briefings over the past year or so. I suppose I have to ask, have you just been using them to electioneer by stealth?
No, because the decision I came to was within the last couple of months rather than a year ago. But certainly, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has shown how much politics matters to people. Decision makers and decisions have been made that have affected people's freedoms and lives. So if ever there was a time where politics was very much high up on the agenda, I would suggest that is very much now. And I think COVID as well, I mean, a big part of my raison d'etre for standing is community. And I think on the island we've still got that community feel across the island and within the constituencies. It isn't there in a lot of other places now, and I think we lose that community spirit at our peril. COVID brought us together. We looked out for people. We supported local businesses. That spirit we've got to try and maintain and move forward with.
If you consider the way government handled the whole COVID situation, if you had been on the other side, if you'd been a politician during that time, what would you have done differently?
Well, this is where it's interesting, because as a journalist, you're not paid to have an opinion or even give a hint of opinion. I would say generally they've handled the COVID situation pretty well. We had that summer of freedom going into the autumn. I think we had a wobble at the new year, maybe had taken the eye off the ball. I think the third lockdown perhaps was avoidable. Mistakes, I think, were made, which is why in the media in particular we were highlighting the steam packet issue amongst others. But generally speaking, they didn't have a guide to go by to deal with a pandemic, and I think generally most people would agree that the government handled it as well as they could do.
Your wife is chair of local commissioners currently. If you are elected in September, I suppose you'd be quite the power couple, won't you? How much of your desire to be an MHK is almost, I don't know, can I call it status seeking, wanting to have that power in your community?
Not at all. I think I've been inspired by my wife, it's fair to say. I've seen the work that she does. She works really hard around the clock. And certainly we've bounced ideas off each other. And I've always had an interest in politics anyway. But this, I guess, seeing my wife involved has stimulated my interest even to a greater level, that now I'm left a job at Manx Radio to go and seek a mandate to become an MHK for Arbory, Castletown and Malew. Could
there be any danger of you being swayed by what might be known as parish pump politics? For example, if there's a local issue on which your wife is very vocal on, I mean, will you feel that compulsion to support that? No, we've had that discussion already. I think my outlook is to obviously look out for the constituents, refer them to the relevant local authority if it is very much a local authority matter, but I have a duty, if I'm elected as an MHK for Arbory, Castletown and Malew, for the national issues. Who would you support as Chief Minister? I'm not even going to comment on that because we don't know who's going to be elected. OK, if we suspect that two of the people who have been named so far might be re-elected, out of those two, who would you support? I would like to hear what they've got to say to me first. Something you said in your declaration when you announced that you were going to stand for election is, I want to work with politicians who are transparent and prepared to put their hand up when they get things wrong. What is one of the things that perhaps you've got wrong over the years? Curveball question time. In the media, we don't always get things right. And I think the best thing to do if you've got something wrong is to hold your hand up and say, look, we made a mistake, and correct it. I don't think there's any harm in that. There's too much spin around government at the moment, and we don't need that here on the island either. And I think also there's too much mudslinging when they get it wrong. They look for somebody else to blame. Just be honest with people. If you've made a mistake, say so. Hold your hand up. You're a better person for it. That was a very political answer already, because I was asking you for a specific occasion when perhaps you've got something wrong and, you could own up to it now.
I am trying to think of a good example to give you. I think whenever I've made a mistake with we've had, every couple argue, don't they? But if I know I'm in the wrong, admit it at the end. Don't just stand your ground for the sake of it.
You've been out canvassing over the past few weeks, and as you say, these are conversations which are going to form the basis of a manifesto which you will be producing in due course. You did mention mental health. Again, that is an issue which has been discussed very, very much so recently. What do you think needs to be done in that area? Well,
I know that the public health departments are looking at the whole issue, and they are looking at it across government, because I think it's too easy to lob money at a single issue and resources at a single issue. But for example, let's look at the causes of mental health. It can be childhood abuse, it can be drug and alcohol misuse, debt, digital anxiety, discrimination, homelessness, being out of a job, neglect, poor housing, poverty. It's across the board. So with a subject like mental well-being, I think you've got to look at it as a big issue across all areas of government and come up with a policy rather than just dealing in silos, which I think a lot of people have already mentioned when I've been knocking on the doors, that they feel that that is the case.
Looking at government as a whole, and you mentioned silos there because, again, that's been a buzzword in recent years, and the whole nature of the working of government, some people feel that there's a real need to change within that. What are your views on that?
Well, I would like to discuss a lot more the whole idea of single legal entity. And there is the comment again, and it's a feeling I've got, that government is still a bit bloated. In fact, numbers have increased during the last 5 years rather than the promise of it decreasing.
So when you're talking about government being bloated, where exactly do you mean?
I think middle and top management. I think we need to have, what I'd like to see is a strategic approach from governments, and then the departments go out and deal with their areas. For example, mending the roads, get those done. I mean, that's become a standing joke on the island, but it's past that now. The roads are in a dreadful condition at the moment, and they've got worse during the last 5 years, despite promises 5 years ago that issue would be addressed. And I know it's a lot of money, but it's about making the island attractive, going back to the points we were discussing right at the very beginning.
And that's it, though, isn't it? There are so many areas which do need attention, which then do cost money, and you are, if you are elected, going to have to learn very quickly how to prioritise, and how sometimes you're going to have to say to those people who voted for you, I couldn't vote for that because it didn't sit right with me. How prepared are you for that?
100%, because that is what you're going to be paid for doing. And you aren't going to win every vote. You're not going to be able to support things that you feel you should be. And on behalf of constituents, there will be unpopular decisions to make. But I think if you're open and honest again, and go out and explain that, or if you're rung up about it, just have that conversation and explain why you voted the way you have. I think one way in which we can save a considerable amount of money is dealing with capital projects, and I am in favour of having this capital projects centralised unit, which will then do the tendering, which will then do the budgeting, and which will then oversee the project. I think some examples like the promenade, like the Liverpool landing stage, too big for infrastructure and one department to handle on their own.
Well, Tim Glover, if you had 30 seconds to speak to the people of Arbory, Castletown and Malew to say why they should invest a vote in you on September the 23rd, what would you say?
Well, I'm going to basically not make a whole list of promises, because I can't do that on my own. There will be 23 other MHKs if I get elected. Come the end of September, you've got to bring them along, and a majority of them, to get anything through. The only promise I'm going to make is that I will work very hard. I will be doing that with honesty, with openness. I will listen. I will try and understand as well. And I care deeply about the area that I'm hoping to represent. It's my patch. I've lived in all three parts of the constituency of Arbory, Castletown and Malew. It'd be an absolute honour to be elected as one of your 2 MHKs for the area. And I promise to work hard and give this a real go.